The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, cold and distant like they had always been. Calvor stood in the observation deck of the Aurora Dawn, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the metal floor. His silver skin caught the starlight, making him look like a statue carved from moonstone. He had been assigned to this human vessel 3 days ago, and already he found their constant chatter exhausting. The Zentrini were known across 12 sectors as the finest guardians money could hire. Their mental abilities made them perfect sentinels, able to detect threats before they materialized, to sense danger through the emotional ripples it created in space. Calvor had served for 40 cycles, protecting cargo ships, diplomatic envoys, and scientific expeditions. This assignment should have been no different. Humans were unremarkable. Every species in the galaxy knew this. They had no natural armor, no enhanced senses, no particular gifts that set them apart. They had stumbled into space travel relatively recently and were still struggling to find their place among the established powers. The Galactic Council tolerated them, but few took them seriously. Calvor certainly didn't. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft hiss. He didn't turn. His mental awareness told him it was the young engineer again, the one who kept trying to initiate what humans called friendship. Calvor found the concept baffling. What purpose did emotional bonding serve in a professional environment? Beautiful view, isn't it? Danny Bryant said, walking up to stand beside him. The human was barely half Calvor's height, with dark hair that stuck up in odd directions and a smile that seemed permanently fixed on his face. "It is space," Calvor replied, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones common to his species. "It looks as it always does." Danny laughed, seemingly unbothered by the cold response. "I guess when you've seen as much of it as you have, it gets old. But me? I've only been in deep space for 2 years. Still feels like magic." Calvor said nothing. His mental shields were firmly in place, blocking out the constant noise of human thoughts and feelings. It was standard protocol. Lesser species generated such chaotic mental energy that prolonged exposure could be disorienting. Better to maintain the barriers and focus on the job. "My daughter thinks I'm exploring like in the old adventure stories," Danny continued, pulling up a photo on his datapad. A small girl with missing front teeth grinned at the camera. "She's 7. Doesn't quite understand that I mostly just fix coolant leaks and recalibrate engines. Your personal life is not relevant to my duties," Calvor said. Danny's smile dimmed slightly, but didn't disappear. "Right. Well, if you need anything, Engineering Bay is on Deck 3. We've got coffee that'll strip paint off a hull, if you're interested." He left, and Calvor returned his attention to the stars. Humans were so inefficient with their communication, constantly sharing irrelevant information about their lives. What did it matter if the engineer had offspring? What purpose did showing pictures serve? The Zentrini had long ago moved beyond such primitive social bonding. They were stronger for it. The ship's captain entered the observation deck an hour later. Lisa Morgan was older than most of the crew, with gray threading through her brown hair and lines around her eyes that humans developed from decades of expression. She carried herself with quiet authority. "Sentinel Calvor," she said, nodding respectfully. "I wanted to check in. Is everything satisfactory with your quarters?" "They are adequate," he replied. "Good. We're entering the Korvax corridor tomorrow. It's technically neutral space, but there have been reports of raider activity. Nothing we can't handle, but I wanted you to be aware." Calvor inclined his head. This was the kind of interaction he appreciated. Direct, purposeful, professional. "I will increase my monitoring during the passage." "Appreciated." Morgan paused, studying him with those sharp human eyes. "The crew has been excited to have a Zentrini aboard. Some of them have never met one of your people before. I hope they haven't been too intrusive." "They are manageable," Calvor said, which was as close to criticism as he would offer to a client. Morgan smiled slightly. "Danny can be enthusiastic, but he's a good kid. They all are. Best crew I've ever served with." She left, and Calvor considered her words. Humans formed these attachments to their work groups, calling them family, treating professional relationships as something deeper. It seemed to make them vulnerable, creating potential emotional weaknesses that enemies could exploit. The Zentrini way was cleaner, simpler. You performed your duty. You maintained your discipline. You did not allow sentiment to cloud judgment. The next day, the Aurora Dawn entered the Korvax corridor. It was a shortcut through a region of space cluttered with asteroid fields and sensor dead zones. Most commercial traffic avoided it, but it cut 3 days off their journey to the orbital station Kepler. Captain Morgan had judged the risk acceptable. Calvor positioned himself near the bridge, his senses extended outward. He monitored the emotional resonance of the space around them, searching for the telltale signatures of hostile intent. Pirates and raiders generated distinctive patterns, their aggression and greed creating ripples a trained Zentrini could detect from considerable distance. The human crew went about their duties with remarkable cheerfulness. They joked with each other over the communications channels. They shared meals in the small galley, their laughter echoing through the corridors. Someone was playing music in the cargo bay while running inventory. It all seemed so unnecessarily loud, so chaotic. "Sentinel!" the navigator called from the station. Paul Chen was younger than the captain. With steady hands and a calm demeanor Kael'vor found relatively tolerable. "I'm picking up a minor spatial distortion at bearing 27 Mark IV. Could be nothing, probably just gravitational interference from the asteroids." Kael'vor extended his awareness toward the coordinates. He sensed nothing unusual, no emotional signatures that indicated danger. "It is likely sensor noise."
Maintain current course.
Paul nodded and returned to his calculations. Captain Morgan glanced at Calver from her command chair, trusting his judgment without question. That was good. Humans who second-guessed their hired protection rarely survived long in disputed space. The spatial distortion grew stronger over the next hour. The ship's sensors couldn't quite lock onto it, reading it as everything from a micro-wormhole to simple equipment malfunction. Kael'vor remained unconcerned. His mental senses were far more reliable than any human technology, and he detected no threats. He was wrong. The distortion collapsed inward with sudden violence, creating a shockwave that ripped across local space. The Aurora Dawn shuddered, alarms blaring as the impact struck the starboard hull. Kael'vor was thrown sideways, his mental shields disrupting from the unexpected force. For just a fraction of a second, his barriers fell. And in that moment, he felt them. Not the ship, not the abstract concept of the crew, but them individually, specifically, completely. Danny in engineering, fear spiking through his thoughts as he worried about breach protocols and whether his daughter would grow up without a father. Sophie Grant in medical, already moving toward supplies, her mind calculating casualty scenarios while underneath ran a current of determination to save everyone she could. Paul at his station, hands steady despite the terror singing through his nerves because the captain needed him focused. The thoughts hit Kael'vor like a physical blow. They weren't simple. They weren't primitive. They were deep and complex and rich with layers he had never imagined existed. Love and fear and duty and hope all tangled together in patterns so intricate they made his own thoughts seem hollow by comparison. He slammed his shields back up, gasping with effort. Around him, the crew was responding to the emergency, professional and efficient despite their fear. Captain Morgan was calling for damage reports, her voice steady. Kael'vor stood frozen, his three-fingered hands trembling slightly. What had he just felt? The damage to the Aurora Dawn was minor, superficial hull plating mostly, but Kael'vor felt like something inside him had cracked wide open. He stood in his quarters 2 hours after the incident, attempting to meditate and rebuild his mental shields to their proper strength. The barriers were back in place, but they felt thin now, fragile in a way they had never been before. He could still remember what he had felt in that brief moment. The thoughts had been so vivid, so overwhelmingly real. Danny's fear for his child, Sophie's determination to protect her patients, Paul's courage in the face of terror. These weren't the simple emotional responses Kael'vor had expected from a lesser species. They were sophisticated, multi-layered, as complex as anything a Zentrini might experience. His instructors had taught him that humans were emotionally primitive. They felt basic drives like hunger, fear, and aggression, but lacked the depth of consciousness that marked truly advanced species. That was why the Zentrini maintained their mental shields around them, not just to avoid the noise, but because there was nothing worth hearing. But what Kael'vor had felt suggested something different entirely. He tried to push the thoughts away and focus on his meditation, but his concentration kept slipping. Through his weakened shields, he could sense the emotional currents of the ship around him. Usually they were just background noise easily filtered out. Now they kept intruding on his awareness, demanding attention. A knock at his door interrupted his efforts. Kael'vor considered not answering, but that would be unprofessional. He opened the door to find Danny standing there, holding a container of some kind. "Hey, Sentinel," Danny said, looking uncertain. "I wanted to thank you for earlier. Your warning about the distortion being dangerous probably saved us from worse damage." Kael'vor had given no such warning, but he didn't correct the human. "I performed my contracted duties." "Right, sure. Well, anyway, Sophie made extra food tonight, and I thought maybe you'd want some. It's just stew, nothing fancy, but it's good." Danny held out the container. Kael'vor stared at it. The Zentrini consumed nutrient solutions, not solid food prepared with care and offered as a gesture of appreciation. He should refuse. He should maintain his professional distance. Through his damaged shields, he felt Danny's thoughts. The engineer was nervous, hoping to bridge the gap between them, wanting to repay what he saw as a debt. Underneath that was genuine warmth, a desire to connect with another being simply because connection itself had value. "I do not require sustenance at this time," Calvor said carefully. "But your gesture is noted." Danny's disappointment flickered through his mind before his smile covered it. "No problem. The offer stands if you change your mind. Sophie's a great cook." After Danny left, Calvor sat in his quarters feeling strangely unsettled. He had rejected the offering to maintain proper boundaries, yet the rejection had caused the human pain. Why did that matter to him? Why did he sense that pain so clearly now? The next day, Calvor tried to avoid the crew as much as possible. He stationed himself in the cargo bay, running security scans from there instead of the bridge. But the Aurora Dawn was not a large ship, and isolation proved impossible. Sophie found him during the mid-cycle meal period. The medical officer was small even by human standards, with dark skin and observant eyes that missed very little. She carried 2 cups of what humans called coffee. "Thought you might want company," she said, sitting on a nearby crate without waiting for permission. "Danny said you seemed kind of off yesterday." "I am functioning within normal parameters," Calvor replied stiffly. "Sure." Sophie sipped her coffee, seemingly content to sit in silence. Through his shields, Calvor felt her thoughts drifting. She was thinking about a message she had received from home, about her brother who was sick. She was worried but trying not to show it, maintaining her professional calm for the crew's sake. Calvor tried to block out the thoughts, but they kept seeping through. He could feel her concern, her love for her family, her guilt at being so far away when they needed her. The emotions were so clear, so powerful, that they made his own carefully controlled existence seem pale in comparison. "Do you have family, Sentinel?" Sophie asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. The Zentrini do not form familial bonds in the way humans do. We are raised in collective creches and trained according to our aptitudes. "That sounds lonely," Sophie said quietly. "It is efficient. Emotional attachments create vulnerabilities." Sophie looked at him with those sharp eyes. "Maybe, but they also create reasons to be strong. My brother is sick, and I can't be there to help him." "But knowing he's out there, that he loves me and I love him, that gives me purpose. Makes the hard days worth it." She left him with the second cup of coffee, even though he had not asked for it. Calvor stared at the dark liquid, processing her words. The Zentrini believed that emotional bonds were weaknesses to be eliminated. But what if they were wrong? What if those bonds were actually a different kind of strength? That evening, Captain Morgan gathered the crew in the galley for what she called a family meal. It was apparently a tradition on the Aurora Dawn, everyone eating together once a week. Calvor had avoided it previously, but Morgan had specifically requested his presence this time. He sat at the end of the long table, watching the humans interact. They shared food from common dishes, passing bowls and plates back and forth. They told stories, laughed at each other's jokes, argued playfully about trivial matters. The emotional warmth in the room was almost overwhelming to Calvor's weakened shields. Paul was telling a story about his childhood, about learning to navigate by the stars from his grandfather. He'd take me out to the desert, away from all the lights, and we'd just look up. He'd point out constellations and tell me stories about them. Half of them he probably made up, but I didn't care. Those nights were magic. As Paul spoke, Calvor couldn't help but sense the memory through his damaged barriers. He felt the young boy's wonder, the old man's patient love, the desert wind, and the vast sky overhead. The memory was so rich, so full of meaning, that it made Calvor's chest ache in a way he didn't understand. "What about you, Sentinel?" someone asked. "Do the Zentrini have stories about the stars?" Calvor realized with startlement that he didn't know. The Zentrini had star charts and navigational data, but stories? Tales told for the simple joy of sharing wonder. If they did, he had never heard them. "We have extensive astronomical records," he said finally. The crew seemed to realize that was all the answer they would get, and the conversation moved on. But Calvor sat there, listening to their voices, feeling their emotions wash over him through his compromised shields. Each person at this table carried their own universe of thoughts and feelings inside them. Each one had stories, memories, loves, and fears as complex as his own. How had he never noticed this before? How had his people dismissed humans as primitive when they were capable of such depth? Danny caught his eye from across the table and smiled, no longer seeking anything in return, just offering simple kindness. Through his shields, Kelvor felt the engineer's genuine good nature, his hope that everyone around him was happy, his satisfaction in this moment of shared warmth. Kelvor found himself nodding slightly in return, acknowledging the gesture. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Kelvor made a decision. Instead of fighting to strengthen his shields, he allowed them to remain thin. He wanted to understand what he had discovered, these complex inner worlds that humans carried with them. His training said it was dangerous, that exposure to such emotional intensity could compromise his effectiveness. But something deeper, something he was only beginning to recognize in himself, said that understanding these people might be more important than maintaining his isolation. The alarm woke Kelvor from his meditation 3 days later. It was still early in the ship's cycle, the corridors quiet except for the automated systems humming in the background. He reached the bridge in seconds, his long legs carrying him swiftly through the narrow passages. Captain Morgan was already in her command chair, her face tight with controlled tension. Paul sat at the navigation console, fingers moving rapidly across the controls. Sophie stood near the communications station, her medical training not needed yet, but her presence steadying the younger crew members. 3 ships, Morgan said, without looking away from her display. Kashari raiders closing fast from the port side. They must have been hiding in the asteroid field, waiting. Kelvor moved to the sensor array and confirmed what his mental awareness had already told him. 3 vessels, each twice the size of the Aurora Dawn, their hulls scarred from countless battles. The Kashari were known throughout this sector as opportunists, who took prisoners and sold them to labor camps in the outer territories. They rarely killed unless necessary, preferring living cargo to corpses. "They're hailing us," the communications officer said, her voice shaking slightly. "Put them through," Morgan ordered. A harsh voice filled the bridge, speaking in standard galactic tongue. "Human vessel Aurora Dawn, you will cut your engines and prepare for inspection. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 2 minutes to comply." Morgan glanced at Kelvor. Options? He ran the calculations quickly. The Aurora Dawn was a transport vessel, lightly armed and not built for combat. The Kashari ships carried enough firepower to reduce them to debris in minutes. Running was pointless. They had already been caught. Fighting was suicide. "Compliance appears to be the logical choice," Kelvor said. "They will board, take what they want, and likely leave the ship intact." "And the crew?" Morgan asked quietly. Kelvor hesitated. Through his thin shields, he could feel the fear rippling through every person on the bridge. But beneath that fear, he sensed something else. Determination. Loyalty. The crew was terrified, but they were also prepared to protect each other. He could feel Danny in engineering, his thoughts focused on his daughter, but his hands steady as he prepared emergency protocols. Sophie was mentally reviewing triage procedures, ready to save whoever she could. Paul was calculating jump coordinates, even though he knew they couldn't outrun the raiders, refusing to give up while any option remained. "They will take prisoners," Kelvor said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. "Those with valuable skills will likely be sold to labor operations." "The Kashari prefer profit to violence, so we just let them take our people?" Morgan's voice was steel. "Captain, I am contracted to protect this vessel and its cargo. The Zentrini protocols in this situation are clear. I extract essential personnel and negotiate for the ship's release. Crew members are expendable assets." The words felt wrong even as he said them. Through his damaged shields, he felt the shock and hurt that rippled through the bridge crew. They had begun to trust him, to see him as their protector, and he had just declared them expendable. Morgan turned to face him fully, her eyes blazing. "Is that what you really believe? That my crew are just assets to be sacrificed?" Kelvor wanted to say yes. His training demanded it. The Zentrini way was clear, logical, efficient. You saved what was valuable and accepted the loss of everything else. Emotional attachment to individuals was a weakness that clouded judgment. But he could feel Danny's thoughts from 3 decks away, the engineer thinking about his daughter and hoping she would remember him as someone brave. He could sense Sophie preparing herself mentally to care for the wounded, her determination to save lives even in the worst scenario. He felt Paul's fear, controlled but present, and underneath it the navigator's fierce wish that the younger crew members would somehow survive this. 1 minute 30 seconds until Kashari arrival, the computer announced. "I need an answer, Sentinel," Morgan said. "Are you here to protect a ship, or are you here to protect people?" Kelvor closed his eyes and did something he had never done before. He dropped his mental shields completely. Not just thinned them, but removed them entirely. The rush of thoughts and emotions hit him like a tidal wave. Every person on the Aurora Dawn became instantly present in his consciousness. He felt all of them at once, their fears and hopes and loves and dreams crashing through his mind in a cascade of overwhelming sensation. Danny thinking about his daughter's last birthday, remembering her laughter and praying she would not grow up without a father. Sophie remembering her brother's last message, wishing she had told him she loved him one more time. Paul thinking about his grandfather teaching him the stars, holding on to that memory like an anchor. The cargo handler on Deck 5 who had a partner waiting at the next station. The junior engineer who had just gotten engaged. The cook who sent half her pay home to support her parents. They were not just crew. They were not just assets. They were individuals, each carrying entire universes inside themselves, each one precious and irreplaceable and real. And Kael'vor realized something that shook him to his core. He had been protecting the wrong thing. His contract said vessel and cargo, but those were just metal and goods. What mattered, what was truly worth protecting, were these fragile, complex, beautiful minds now laid bare before his consciousness. "Captain," Kael'vor said, his voice carrying harmonics he had never used before, "I have spent 3 days feeling your crew's thoughts. I have sensed their love for each other, their courage, their determination to survive. I have felt what makes them who they are." 1 minute, the computer announced. "And what does that mean?" Morgan asked. "It means that my protocols are wrong. It means that your people are not expendable. It means..." Kael'vor paused, struggling to put into words something the Zentrini had no language for. "It means I am not protecting a vessel anymore."
I am protecting them. All of them.
Morgan's expression shifted from anger to surprise. "Can you fight 3 ships? Alone?" "No, but I can make them wish they had never found us." Kael'vor turned to face the view screen where the Kashari ships were now visible, growing larger with each second. "Keep the crew calm, Captain. What I am about to do will be frightening." "What are you planning?" Morgan demanded. Kael'vor allowed himself a small smile, an expression he had learned from watching Danny. "I am going to show them why the Zentrini are feared in certain sectors, and I am going to do what I should have understood days ago. I am going to protect my people." Sophie's breath caught audibly. Paul's hand stilled on his controls. Morgan stared at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "Your people?" she asked softly. Through the psychic connection that still linked him to the entire crew, Kael'vor felt their response to his words. Surprise, hope, and underneath it all, trust. They believed he would save them. They believed he cared, and he did. Somewhere in the past 3 days, without meaning to, without wanting to, he had formed exactly the kind of emotional bond his species had taught him to avoid. He cared whether these humans lived or died. He cared about Danny's daughter having her father. He cared about Sophie seeing her brother again. He cared about Paul teaching his own grandchildren about the stars someday. 30 seconds, the computer announced. "Yes, Captain," Kael'vor said quietly. "My people. And I will not let the Kashari take them." The first raider ship came alongside the Aurora Dawn, its docking clamps extending like metallic claws. Kael'vor stood perfectly still, gathering his mental energy, preparing to use abilities he had kept hidden during his entire time aboard. The humans didn't know what a Zentrini sentinel could truly do when they stopped holding back. When they fought, not from duty, but from love. They were about to find out. Kael'vor closed his eyes and reached out with his mind across the void of space. The psychic abilities of the Zentrini were well known in theory, but few species had ever witnessed their full extent. Most sentinels worked as passive guardians, using their mental senses to detect threats and their physical prowess to neutralize them. What Kael'vor was about to do went far beyond that basic application. He touched the minds of the Kashari raiders aboard all 3 ships simultaneously. There were perhaps 200 of them total, their thoughts a chaotic mess of greed and casual cruelty. They saw the Aurora Dawn as easy prey, the crew as merchandise to be sold. The raiders had done this hundreds of times before and expected no real resistance. Kael'vor gave them their deepest nightmares. The Kashari were a predatory species, but like all predators, they had fears. Buried in their genetic memory was the terror of being hunted themselves, of being the prey instead of the hunter. Kael'vor found those primal fears and brought them screaming to the surface. He created a psychic projection that spread through all 3 ships like wildfire. They saw a Zentrini war sentinel, not the passive guardian they expected, but an ancient terror from the stories their ancestors had told. In the projection, Calvor appeared as he truly could be, 10 feet tall, with silver skin that seemed to burn with inner light, his eyes pools of darkness that saw into their very souls. The image stalked through their ships, unstoppable and merciless. On the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, alarms began to sound. The Kashari ships were firing on each other, their crews panicking and shooting at shadows. "What did you do?" Morgan asked, watching the chaos on her screens. "I showed them what they should fear," Calvor replied, his voice strained from the mental effort. "But it is only an illusion. When they realize this, they will attack in earnest." As if responding to his words, the lead Kashari ship suddenly stopped its erratic behavior. The raider commander had stronger mental defenses than his crew and had managed to shake off the projection. His voice came through the communications channel, filled with rage. "Zentrini tricks! All ships target the transport vessel, disable their engines, but keep the hull intact. I want that sentinel alive." "They're powering weapons," Paul called out from his station. Impact in 20 seconds. Calvor felt the crew's fear spike through his open connection to them. They trusted him, but trust could not stop plasma cannons. He had to do more than create illusions. He reached out with his telekinetic abilities, the power that Mo Zentrini kept carefully controlled and limited. His people could move small objects, manipulate controls from a distance, but what Calvor attempted now was far beyond that scale. He grabbed hold of the weapon systems on the nearest Kashari ship and crushed them. The metal groaned and shrieked as invisible force tore through circuits and power conduits. Plasma that should have been channeled through controlled firing mechanisms instead erupted inside the ship itself. A raider vessel listed to one side, venting atmosphere and sparks. "Impossible," Morgan breathed. "You can do that?" Calvor did not answer. The effort of maintaining the telekinetic grip was enormous, like trying to hold a mountain with his bare hands. Sweat beaded on his silver skin, something the crew had never seen before. Zentrini did not sweat unless pushed far beyond their normal limits. The second Kashari ship opened fire. Energy bolts streaked toward the Aurora Dawn's engines. Calvor sensed them coming through his mental connection to the space around him. He could feel the weapons discharge a fraction of a second before they fired, could trace the trajectory of each shot through the emotional resonance it created. He could not stop them all, but he could deflect some. His telekinetic power lashed out again, grabbing 3 of the 5 incoming shots and shoving them off course. The other 2 hit the Aurora Dawn's shields, draining them by 40%. The ship shuddered from the impact. "Return fire," Morgan ordered. "All weapons, target the lead ship." The Aurora Dawn's defensive cannons opened up, small compared to the Kashari weapons, but enough to make them cautious. Paul had already begun evasive maneuvers, turning the transport vessel with surprising agility for something so ungainly. Calvor felt another weapons discharge building, this time from the third raider ship, and it was targeting not the engines, but the crew quarters. They were trying to kill his people. Something ancient and fierce awakened in Calvor's chest. It was not the cold calculation of his training. It was not the logical assessment of threats and responses. It was rage, pure and protective, the fury of a guardian who had found something worth dying for. He released the full extent of his power. The psychic wave that erupted from Calvor hit all 3 Kashari ships simultaneously. It was not an illusion this time, but raw mental force, a telepathic scream that bypassed their shields and struck directly at their consciousness. Raiders collapsed at their stations, overwhelmed by the psychic assault. Their ships went dark as crew members clutched their heads and fell unconscious. On the Aurora Dawn's bridge, the crew staggered. Even though Calvor was trying to shield them, the edges of his mental attack washed over them like a pressure wave. Sophie grabbed the edge of a console for support. Paul's hands slipped on his controls. Morgan gritted her teeth against the pain. "Sorry," Calvor gasped. "I cannot control it precisely." But through the connection they still shared, the crew felt something else. They felt what Calvor was feeling, his determination to protect them, his willingness to spend every ounce of his strength to keep them safe, his fierce, overwhelming care for each individual life aboard the Aurora Dawn. Danny's voice came through the ship-wide communications from engineering. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. We're with you." Sophie straightened up despite the pressure in her head. "All the way." Paul's hand steadied on his controls. "We trust you, Sentinel." Their faith in him, their courage in the face of terror, gave Calvor strength he did not know he possessed. He pushed harder, maintaining the psychic assault while simultaneously deflecting weapons fire with his telekinesis. It was too much for any one being to sustain, but he refused to stop. He would burn himself out completely before he let the Kashari touch his crew. The lead Kashari ship's commander proved more resilient than his fellows. He fought through the mental attack, his voice harsh and strained as he activated the ship's communications one final time. All Kashari vessels in the sector, this is Commander Vex. We have engaged a rogue Zentrini protecting human assets. The Sentinel has abandoned its protocols. Repeat, Zentrini's Sentinel has gone rogue. Requesting immediate support. The message broadcast on all frequencies before Kael'vor could stop it. He felt the word spreading outward through space, carrying news that would eventually reach his own people. The Zentrini Council would hear that one of their sentinels had violated every protocol, had expended forbidden levels of power to protect what should have been expendable assets. He would face consequences for this, severe ones. But as Kael'vor looked around the bridge and felt the thoughts of the crew throughout the ship, he found that he did not care. Let the Council judge him. Let them strip him of his rank and his honor. These people, these beautiful, complex, courageous humans, were worth any price. "The Kashari are retreating," Paul announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "All 3 ships are breaking off and heading for deep space." Morgan turned to Kael'vor, her face pale but her eyes steady. "What did that message mean? What will happen to you?" Kael'vor lowered himself into a nearby chair, exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced. His silver skin had lost some of its luster, and his hands trembled slightly, but through the bond he still maintained with the crew, he felt their concern for him, their gratitude, their affection. "It means," he said quietly, "that my people will know what I have done, and they will come to question why I did it." Sophie stepped forward and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort. Through his open mental shields, Kael'vor felt her genuine care, her worry for his well-being. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "You saved us," she said simply. "Whatever happens, we won't forget that." Danny's voice came through the communications again. "The Sentinel is a hero. Make sure that gets in the official log, Captain." Morgan nodded slowly. "It will, along with a full account of how a Zentrini Sentinel chose people over protocol." She paused, studying Kael'vor's exhausted face. "Why did you do it? Really?" Kael'vor thought about the question, about the answer his training would demand versus the truth he now understood. "Because I felt your thoughts," he said, "and I discovered that I was protecting them." The Aurora Dawn limped towards Station Kepler over the next 2 days, her damaged engines running at half capacity and her shields still recharging. Kael'vor spent most of that time in his quarters, recovering from the enormous expenditure of mental energy. The crew brought him nutrient solutions and sat with him in shifts, seemingly unable to leave him alone even though he assured them he required no assistance. Danny came by every few hours, often just sitting quietly and working on repair reports. He did not speak much, but through the connection that Kael'vor still maintained with the crew, he could feel the engineer's gratitude and concern. Sophie checked his vital signs twice a day, her medical training insisting on it even though Zentrini physiology was quite different from human. Paul brought him updated star charts and talked about navigation theory, his way of showing care through shared professional interest. Captain Morgan visited on the morning of the 2nd day. She sat across from Kael'vor in his small quarters, her expression serious. "A Zentrini Council ship is waiting for us at Station Kepler," she said without preamble. "They received the Kashari distress call and want to retrieve you immediately upon our arrival." Kael'vor had expected this. The Council would not ignore a Sentinel who had violated core protocols. "I understand. I will transfer to their vessel without incident." "What will they do to you?" Morgan asked quietly. "I do not know. The Zentrini have not faced this situation before. A Sentinel who protects lesser species with such intensity, who expends forbidden levels of power for emotional reasons, this goes against everything we believe." He paused, considering his words carefully. "They will likely determine that I have been compromised by prolonged exposure to human emotional patterns. I may be reassigned, retrained, or possibly retired from service." Morgan's jaw tightened. "That's not right. You saved our lives. You should be honored, not punished." "The Zentrini do not honor emotional attachment. We consider it a weakness, a flaw to be corrected." Kael'vor looked at his hands, still slightly trembling from exhaustion. "For my entire life I believed this was true. We are taught that our way is superior, that species like yours are primitive because you allow feelings to guide your actions." "And now?" Morgan asked. Through the thin walls of the ship, Kael'vor could sense the crew going about their duties. Danny was in engineering, singing quietly to himself as he worked, thinking about the message he would send his daughter when they reached the station. Sophie was in medical, reorganizing her supplies and feeling grateful that she had not needed to use them for emergency surgery. Paul was on the bridge, calculating their final approach vector and feeling proud of how well his navigation had served them during the battle. "Now I think we are the primitive ones," Kael'ver said softly. "We have spent so long avoiding emotional connections that we have forgotten what makes consciousness worth having. You humans feel deeply, love fiercely, and form bonds that give your lives meaning. We Zentrini exist in isolation, performing our duties with perfect efficiency and perfect emptiness." Morgan studied him for a long moment. "Will you tell them that?" "The council? I do not know if they will listen, but yes, I will try." Calvor met her eyes. "I will offer to share the psychic memories of what I experienced here. Perhaps if they feel what I felt, they will understand." "And if they don't?" Calvor smiled slightly, another expression he had learned from the crew. "Then I will have tried, and that will have to be enough." Station Kepler appeared on the view screen 8 hours later, a massive structure of metal and light hanging in the darkness of space. Docked at one of the outer pylons was a ship Calvor recognized immediately. The Vigilant Mind, a Zentrini Council vessel commanded by High Sentinel Tavrish, one of the most rigid traditionalists among his people. The Aurora Dawn received docking clearance and settled into her berth with a gentle shudder. The crew assembled in the main corridor to see Calvor off, even though he had not asked them to. They stood in their worn uniforms, these humans who had shown him what his species had lost, and they looked at him with expressions he could now read clearly even without his psychic senses. Danny stepped forward first, holding something small in his hands. It was a data chip, the kind used for personal messages. "My daughter wanted to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I sent her a message about what happened and she recorded something for you. She thinks you're a hero." Calvor took the chip carefully, holding it like the precious thing it was. Through his connection to Danny, he felt the engineer's love for his child, his gratitude that he would get to see her again, his genuine affection for the strange silver alien who had protected him. Sophie was next. She pressed a small medical scanner into his hand. "In case you need it. I programmed it with Zentrini vital sign parameters." "Well, as best I could from the limited data available." "You did not need to do this," Calvor said. "I know, but you're part of this crew now, whether you're on the ship or not. We take care of our own." Paul gave him a star chart, hand annotated with notes about the best routes through difficult sectors for when you're traveling again. One by one, the crew came forward with small gifts and words of thanks. The cook gave him a container of actual food, insisting he should try it at least once. The cargo handler gave him a lucky coin from Earth. The junior engineer gave him a patch from her academy uniform. Captain Morgan was last. She stood before him with her command bearing, but her eyes were soft. "I've filed a formal commendation with the Galactic Council," she said. "I've also sent a personal message to the Zentrini Council, explaining exactly what you did and why. I don't know if it will help, but I wanted them to hear from me directly." "Thank you, Captain. That was not necessary." "Yes, it was." Morgan held out her hand in a human gesture of farewell. "You told the Kashari that we were your people. That means you're ours too, and we protect our own." Calvor took her hand, marveling at the warmth of human skin, at the connection the simple gesture created. Through his open shields, he felt the affection and respect flowing from every person in that corridor. They had accepted him, not as a hired guardian or a strange alien, but as one of them. "I do not know what will happen when I face the Council," he said to all of them. "But I want you to know that these days aboard the Aurora Dawn have changed me in ways I cannot fully express. You have shown me that emotional bonds are not weaknesses. They are what make existence meaningful." Danny wiped at his eyes. Sophie smiled through her own tears. Paul stood a little straighter, proud and sad at the same time. Calvor walked to the airlock, aware of every person watching him, feeling their thoughts one last time. Love and gratitude and hope that he would be treated fairly. And underneath it all, the wish that somehow, someday, they might see him again. The Vigilant Mind's airlock opened to reveal 3 Zentrini sentinels waiting for him. They stood rigid and formal, their mental shields locked tight, their expressions carefully neutral. High Sentinel Tavrik stood in the center, his silver skin bearing the darker markings of advanced age. "Sentinel Calvor," Tavrish said, his voice carrying the harmonic disapproval of their people, "you have caused significant concern. The reports we received suggest you have violated core protocols and expended forbidden levels of power to protect human assets." "That is correct, High Sentinel." Tavrish's eyes narrowed. You do not deny it? No. I protected them because I came to understand something our people have forgotten. Calvor straightened, meeting the High Sentinel's gaze without fear. I felt their thoughts, High Sentinel. I experienced the depth and complexity of human consciousness. They are not lesser beings. They are simply different, and perhaps in some ways they are wiser than us. Explain yourself. The humans form emotional bonds that we've been taught to avoid. They love, they hope, they sacrifice for each other. These connections make them vulnerable, yes, but they also give them strength and purpose that we Zentrini lack. We exist in perfect isolation, performing our duties with efficiency but without meaning. The other sentinels shifted uncomfortably, but Tavaresh remained still. You believe our way is inferior? I believe our way is incomplete. High Sentinel, I request permission to share with you the psychic memories of my time aboard the Aurora Dawn. Let me show you what I experienced. Let the council feel what I felt.
There was a long silence. Finally, Tavaresh nodded slowly.
Very well. The council will convene to examine your memories. We will determine whether you have been compromised or whether you have discovered something we need to understand. They led Calvor deeper into the ship, into chambers designed for psychic examination. He did not resist. He had nothing to hide and everything to share. If his people could feel what he had felt, if they could experience the richness of human emotional life, perhaps they would begin to question their own isolation. Hours later, after the council had withdrawn to deliberate, Calvor sat alone in a meditation chamber. Through the walls of the ship, across the distance of space, he could still sense the Aurora Dawn docked at the station. He could feel his crew there, Danny and Sophie and Paul and all the others, going about their lives but thinking of him, hoping he was safe. The door opened and Tavaresh entered alone. The High Sentinel looked shaken, his mental shields less rigid than before. We felt your memories, he said quietly. We experienced what you experienced. The depth of their thoughts, the complexity of their emotions, the strength of their bonds. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. The council is disturbed. If humans possess such rich inner lives, what does that say about how we have treated other species? What does it say about our own isolation? What is your judgment? Calvor asked. There is no precedent for this situation. Some council members believe you have been compromised and should be removed from service. Others, myself included, believe you have discovered something important. Tavrish met his eyes. We are ruling that you acted within acceptable parameters given the unique circumstances. However, you are being reassigned away from human contact while the council investigates further. It was not the punishment Calvor had feared, but it was still separation from the people he had come to care for. I understand. Do you regret your actions? Calvor thought about Danny's daughter, about Sophie's brother, about Paul's grandfather and the stars. He thought about all the lives he had saved, all the futures he had protected. No, High Sentinel, I do not regret protecting them. Tavaresh studied him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He lowered his mental shields just slightly, allowing Calvor to sense his thoughts. Beneath the rigid exterior was confusion, curiosity, and the faintest hint of something that might have been envy. Perhaps, the High Sentinel said softly, we are the ones who need protecting, not from physical threats, but from our own unwillingness to truly live. 6 months passed. Calvor served on various assignments, always away from human space as the council had ordered. But he maintained his thinned mental shields, allowing himself to sense the emotional lives of whatever species he encountered. Each one revealed depths and complexities he had never noticed before. Then one day a message reached him. It was from the Zentrini Council, and it contained new orders. He was being reassigned to human diplomatic protection. Several council members, influenced by the memories he had shared, wanted to understand humans better. They wanted sentinels who could appreciate what made the species unique, rather than simply viewing them as inferior. The message included a specific ship assignment, the Horizon's Call, a human diplomatic vessel captained by someone requesting him by name, Captain Lisa Morgan. Calvor arrived at the docking bay where the Horizon's Call waited. The airlock opened and Morgan stood there, older by 6 months but with the same steady eyes and command presence. "Welcome aboard, Sentinel," she said with a slight smile. "Ready to protect some humans?" Through his open shields, Calvor felt the crew beyond her. Different people than the Aurora Dawn, but carrying the same richness of thought and emotion, the same capacity for love and courage and hope. He felt the familiar protective instinct rise in his chest, that fierce determination to keep them safe. But now it was tempered with understanding, with appreciation for what he was truly protecting. Not just lives, but the beautiful complexity of consciousness itself. "Yes, Captain," Kelvor said, allowing himself to smile in return. "I am ready." He stepped through the airlock and did not raise his mental shields.